I just did this interview with Samir Goel, and he's the co-founder of Esusu and the co-CEO. What's really cool about the interview is just how down-to-earth Samir was. He is someone that EY has named Entrepreneur of the Year along with his co-founder, as well as him and his co-founder being named Time 100. These are massive accolades for a company that's on a transformational mission to impact society. Their idea is quite simple, but can have huge impact. The idea is we have so many renters each day that are putting so much of their financial income into our economy, but they're not getting credit for it. They're not getting recognized by building out their credit profile. So they've developed technology to help landlords put these people back in the financial markets by building up their credit profile so they can take out loans for cars or for a home and start to build financial wealth. So this is clearly a company that has a social mission, but it's also creating financial opportunity for those that are investing and, of course, running this organization. So you can do good and do well. He's incredibly humble, really inspiring, and the business and what they're doing as a company, just really, really exciting. So I hope you enjoy the talk that we had.
So let's kick this off first by just making a quick introduction. I'm Ashish Bhatia. I'm a professor of entrepreneurship at the NYU Stern School of Business. And I'm here with Samir Goel, who is co-founder of Esusu, Time 100 in 2023, Entrepreneur of the Year for EY, also 2023.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that kind introduction. But Ashish, it's good to be here. Excited to be chatting with you.
Cool. So, and also importantly, an NYU Stern undergrad alum. We were just talking that like our times didn't quite match up. I think I joined.
I think we missed by like a couple months or something.
Yeah.
But
so
about.
You were 2015 grad?
2016.
2016. All right. So yeah, just right about the same time. So where I wanted to kick off was just to actually have a lot of fun with a question here. You are Time 100, Entrepreneur of the Year for EY. If this was a movie story, the Esusu journey was a movie, what would be the title of that movie and what genre would it be?
It's a great question. I think the title would be Against All Odds, The Journey of Esusu. And I think the genre would be some sort of, I'd say, one of those inspirational movies. You know, you have adversity, you have the hero's journey. We'll go classic Star Wars, the hero's journey. Things go well, things go bad. You know, the funny thing is, no matter how many great things happen when you're an entrepreneur, the journey is the same. Every day something great happens and every day something terrible happens, and you just roll with it. So you stay very humble. I'm grateful to have some of these opportunities, but at the same time, you know, it's the same as it was a few years ago when you're just, you know, trying to figure out how it all comes together.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a great way to start. And I think like the big question that you're just opening up with is, you know, people always think that like the earliest days of being an entrepreneur, like when you're sketching on the back of a napkin is the hardest part, but you're making it sound like it's almost equally hard right now.
You know, it's funny. It's the whole thing is hard, but it's different kinds of hard, right? So when you start, everything is so existential. So your problems are just like survival, right? When Mimo and I started Esusu, we basically put everything on the line. You know, we didn't grow up in a family where we had sort of access to wealth or opportunity. And so really the way we started Esusu was extremely bootstrapped. You know, we were over $100,000 in credit card debt. I couch surfed with friends for months. I used to work at LinkedIn, and, you know, every year they'd have this health and fitness stipend. I would stack it up and use that to go buy gym memberships. And then that's where I would go shower. I worked at a Starbucks's. I think I even got sent to collections by NYU. So it was an intense period of time. And so that's one type of struggle. But as you grow, you have different problems, right? And those problems end up being a lot more sort of interpersonal, risk management, competitive dynamics in the market. And so they're different problems, but they're almost more emotionally exhausting than some of the early day problems, if that makes sense. And so the journey changes. I'm grateful that I'm not worried about us sort of making payroll or some of those basic challenges, but that doesn't mean it's not still hard as you grow and scale.
Wow. No, you painted a vivid picture here in terms of like the grit that you've had to go through. One thing that is very clear to me is that you and your co-founder have been very intentional about building Esusu. And I think, you know, it's important to get a sense from you, like, you talk a lot about doing good and doing well. So doing good for the world, but also making money. How do you believe that companies can really do that?
Absolutely. I completely believe in that. And I think that's the true nature of capitalism, right? People have sort of evolved to have this view of capitalism where it's sort of the shareholder comes at the expense of everyone else. And I actually believe that if you take care of all your constituents, the shareholder will win in the end. And actually, the way to do it, though, is your business model has to be tied to impact. So when you grow key company metrics, revenue, profitability, EBITDA, all that sort of stuff, it also needs to do good for the world. It doesn't work if you're kind of growing revenue and then you plant trees on the side to make the world a better place. Your sort of impact is divergent. But I do believe the truth of any great business is that the fundamental product, service, thing you're creating in the world actually makes it a better place. And that's how you align a business that does well and does good.
Yeah. So you're going to have a lot of critics. I'm sure you've had critics along your journey.
If you don't have critics, you're not doing anything.
But so like what would you say to someone that really challenges you on that? No, you can't do well for the world and make money in every single situation. It's just not possible.
I think that's a false dichotomy. It's a view of the world that I don't agree to. That doesn't mean that other people don't have different opinions, and I'm very happy for them to have a different opinion. I think that ultimately, if you think about the businesses that stand the test of time, the GEs, the IBMs, those businesses have actually done good things for the world, net, right? And so I do fundamentally believe that a product, company, or service needs to create value to survive in the long term. So if you look at sort of stock performance, business performance over time, I would feel very confident saying that those businesses have actually contributed more to society than those who sort of were a flash in the pan. And so do I think it's hard? Absolutely. Do I think it's a trade-off? Absolutely. But I fundamentally believe that good business is doing good and doing well.
Okay. So in terms of trade-offs, one of the things that I teach in my classroom is this theory called the founder dilemma. And the idea is, the notion is that a founder has to either navigate whether they want to be rich or whether they want to be king. And so the idea is that if you're, building a big startup, right, a venture-backed startup, the way that you guys are building with Esusu, you're going to have to take money that's going to reduce your ability to control your outcomes if you want to get rich. So you have to make this trade-off between controlling your organization or giving up some of the ownership to get rich. What do you think about that as it relates to your mission?
I've never heard it put quite that way. Do you want to be rich or do you want to be king? My belief is it depends on the type of business you're trying to create and what your goals are, right? And so to your point, if you want to be king, it sounds like what you're describing is more of a lifestyle business, right? Where you're sort of the sole owner. There's very little sort of capital paid in. You have control of your day-to-day. You have control of your schedule. Maybe it's a 30, 40, 50 person organization versus the venture capital treadmill. I don't think venture is for everyone. But the fundamental thesis behind it is, do you want to have a small piece of a huge pie, or do you want to have all of a very small pie? And I'm a big believer, at least from Mimo and I, we wanted to create a huge pie, right? We started Esusu from our own personal experiences. For me, I grew up in an immigrant family from New Delhi, India. And when we came to America, we thought we had made it. Come to America, everything's going to be great. And that just wasn't the way that it worked out for my family and I. My dad was mugged on his first day here. We didn't have much by way of credit. And it left this impression on me that our financial system is broken for people who are working incredibly hard, who don't have financial means, who don't have financial literacy. And there's a way to recreate that system so it works for everyone. But doing that actually unlocks massive market opportunity. That can be a multi-billion-dollar business that does well and does good. And I want to be a part of creating that pie rather than controlling every aspect of my destiny, but having a very small pie at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I what I'm hearing you say, and this is a key lesson that I focus on in the classroom, is that some people see the world in this dichotomy of being rich or having control or power, but there are so many other reasons to be a founder.
Absolutely.
And so I'm hearing you talk about a number of those reasons. And so, there's another study that talks about founders are following a passion, and they're following either a passion for growth, wanting to watch a company grow. Maybe they're following a passion to deal with people, or they're looking to follow a passion to solve a particular problem or have a social impact. The innovation, they're excited about the product or the solution that they're creating. When you think about those different passions and like what drives you, which one of those is like your main motivation?
I mean, at the end of the day, we started this company based on our passion for the problem, right? We really felt like this was a problem worth solving. And more importantly, if we didn't try to solve it, we would regret it for the rest of our lives. And I had the good fortune of having an incredible co-founder, my work husband, Mimo, and we could be in the trenches together, right? So it was sort of all those things intersecting, a strong sense of impact and purpose, a problem that we felt strongly about from a technology standpoint, and then a great partner so that you're building something with someone. I've always believed that nothing worth doing is worth doing alone. And so having that great co-founder, co-CEO partnership that we had also made it incredibly rewarding and worthwhile. When I think about being a founder, I don't think it's the thing to do just because you think it's cool or interesting or fun. It's none of those things. Being a founder, starting a company absolutely sucks in almost every single way. I only encourage people to do it if you really believe in what you're doing, because that's what's going to get you through the tough times, right? You get told no 300 times a day. You have good days, you have bad days. For us, I told you a little bit about our story. We couch surfed, we took on debt. My parents had no clue what I was doing. They were thinking I was crazy, right? You make all these sacrifices, and what keeps you going is the people you're doing it with, the problem you're solving, and the impact you can have in the world. And so that's why I think that's important. I think right now entrepreneurship is really sexy. They put all these like great Forbes and Time and all these things that lionize it, but most people don't realize what it takes. And I think that's a little bit of a misnomer. There's faster ways to get rich if all you want to do is get rich, you know?
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot there to unpack. And one of the things I noticed, and I've heard you say this before, that it sounds to me like a big part of this journey that's been rewarding for you is pursuing it with your co-founder.
Absolutely.
I called him your work husband. And I think, kind of a question I have for you on this is that, as you said, society really thinks of this as like the individual hero's journey. And we, at the top, we're talking about this being a hero's journey, but this is more than one hero. And in fact, I hear you talk about other stakeholders as also heroes in your journey. So I'm curious, like, why is that so important? Why is it so important that you've shared this pathway with someone else?
Like I said earlier, one of my core beliefs is that nothing worth doing is worth doing alone. And I think nowhere is that more true than the founder journey. It's lonely, it's painful. I think even great entrepreneurs like Elon Musk, who has, many critics and many fans, describes it like eating glass. And I thought that was a very apt analogy, right? As an entrepreneur, you're solving the most painful problems that no one else can solve every single day. And so the idea of this being this sort of self-made entrepreneur or this one sort of rugged individual who overcomes all adversity is just false. It always takes a village, right? And so maybe I would recharacterize the journey of, again, the title of our story as Against All Odds, the story of the village, or something like that, because ultimately it takes sacrifices from friends, family, loved ones. It takes early employees taking a bet on you. It takes having a great co-founder. It takes having great investors. It takes getting lucky at times, and it takes tremendous grit and resilience. And I think people struggle with those two things being needed, right? I think people talk about sort of opportunity as luck meets preparation. And I believe that, right? You need things to come together. I feel very fortunate that when Mimo and I met, when we did, we had an equal amount of conviction. We both decided to quit our jobs and give 110% to Esusu. If neither one of us had made that choice at that time, at that moment, there would be no Esusu, right? If we didn't have those early investors who took a bet on us, if we didn't have people who guided us and coached us, who had been entrepreneurs for decades before, right, we would not have built the company that we built. So I really do believe that it's more than the one individual. I think culture in America really loves that identity, but both myself and Mimo grew up in more collectivist cultures in India, Nigeria, where it's all about the village, all about the ecosystem, right? And we fundamentally believe that, and that's why we're co-CEOs, which was not a popular concept when we started doing it.
Yeah, well, that's great. And I'll tell you, in the classroom, it's really a challenge to navigate this sense that, like, well, but I'm not this, celebrity entrepreneur. I can't do that, right? And they don't necessarily see that value in co-creating. And so it's really great to hear you talk about it and to see that in your journey.
And on that note, I just say, I think what people underestimate is half of it's just about getting started. I think now, because there's such a practice of entrepreneurship, people feel like you need to have this playbook, you need to have this great business plan. I know you have the business model canvas that you teach at Stern and other places too, but so much of that journey is just trying things, failing, and trying again, right? And so I think people sometimes get dissuaded by trying to know everything before they start. Another famous entrepreneur, Jensen Huang, he was interviewed a few months ago, and people asked him, if you were to do it all over again, would you still choose to go down this journey? This one, NVIDIA is valued at $3 trillion. Yeah. He said no, because he wouldn't have wanted to do it if he knew everything that he needed to know. So part of the magic of being an entrepreneur is not knowing and just giving it a shot. And that ignorance, because you don't know every challenge, every adversity, every problem, is what's going to help you get to a point where there's that critical mass and momentum. But if you knew it all before, you would not do it.
Yeah. So on that point, so you went to NYU Stern School of Business, and like other selective business schools, the culture in these business schools tend to really emphasize finance and consulting. How did you navigate away from that noise and to start at that time a social enterprise transformation? Like how did you do that?
It's funny. I think I've always been driven by the problem. And so with transformation, I grew up in a household where, like I said, means were modest. But, one of the things my parents always impressed on me was sort of this idea that you never leave food on the table. There isn't enough food to go around. There's so many hungry people, like never let a drop of food go to waste. And then I came to the big city, and every day I'd go to events and there'd be stacks and stacks of food that people would be throwing away. And that just didn't sit well with me.
Yeah.
And so once again, I was sort of driven by the problem. But what's funny is I've never considered myself to be a great academic student. For me, I always felt more inspired by practical things, right? So at Stern, there's all these classes like, fundamentals of finance, international business, whatever it is. And I kind of wish that the syllabus was basically like, here's $1,000, invest it in the stock market and figure out how to make a return. And I promise you I would have killed that class, but reading about it in a textbook, having it be so theory-based, it was hard for me without the application. And so I almost considered my schooling in some ways the access to brilliant academics like yourself who also have a foot in reality. That's something I loved about Stern, was all the professors were not just academics, but they were applied academics, right? So they were teaching, they were lecturing, they were getting the best of the knowledge, but they were also entrepreneurs, business owners, consultants, right? And that marriage I thought was cool. And for me, I treated New York City like my campus, right? So I'd be out and about pitching business owners every day. Transformation, I just go to every single coffee shop, salad bar, whatever around campus, and just be like, hey, we're starting this business. Do you want to make a contribution? Do you want to sponsor an event? Do you want to do X, Y, Z? And I loved being able to do that, and there's this thing when you're a student where people, for whatever reason, just see something of themselves in you. And so they're like, sure, I'll talk to you. Sure, you're a student, I'll talk to you. But the minute you're a professional, nobody wants to talk to you. You're like, all right, it's another sales pitch. I don't have time for this. But when you're a student, you kind of have that magic door open. And so I really took advantage of the campus of New York City as much as I did the campus of NYU.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And what I'm hearing you say is like the experiential learning was so key for you. Absolutely. And that's something that the school, I'll give credit, is like we're really doing more and more of that, particularly in the entrepreneurship space. But like one question I have here, like just to really build on this, is like transformation is really just taking food from one spot and moving it to another. It's a pretty low tech, not high bar innovation in terms of what you've done. Now, it's important. It solves an important problem. I imagine when you were building that in college, people were looking at you and saying, like, okay, it's like kind of a simple problem. Like I'm doing something bigger, more important. Like, how did you navigate that tension? Because there is a lot of pressure to be like, oh, working at JPMorgan or working at a big consulting firm. You must have felt some of that tension. I'm just curious how you pushed through some of that noise and didn't maybe doubt yourself.
It's sort of like a muscle, right? So like anything, it's like the more you do it, the easier it gets. And so obviously the first few times you pitch, you're nervous, you're fumbling, you're drooling on yourself, so to speak, right? And then you get used to it. And then people say no, they say this is stupid, the idea won't work, this is why it won't work, there's bigger things. Yeah. And you just keep at it, right? And like you get those first wins. I was fortunate once again to build with a great co-founder, Hannah, who was also an NYU student at the time. And in some ways, it's sort of like I just loved what we were doing, like just duct taping a problem together. You described it as low tech, and maybe people thought it was a smaller problem, but what people sometimes miss is like there's enough food in the world to feed every single person on the planet. Hunger is a man-made problem, a man and woman-made problem, right? And we can solve that. And what was so interesting was there was actually a business model we have. It costs companies money to throw food away. So they are burning money on their balance sheet every single day by throwing food away that could be serving someone that's homeless on the street down the block. You can write off that food as a tax write-off when you donate it. You can reduce your operating costs. And really the problem that we were solving was not as simple as people thought, because it was the same problem Uber was solving, which is how do you get something from A to B in a shelf-stable manner without it going bad, right? And so we ended up spending a lot of time investing in logistics and infrastructure. We never had the sophistication of Uber or scaled like Uber or any of that, but it was still an interesting problem. And I think over time, we started to get more sophisticated, right? You start with pitching, maybe it's like college clubs, right? You have the finance club, they have a couple boxes of pizza. Okay, that's kind of basic. Then you start pitching the local, Fresh & Co. or Sweet Green or whatever it is, and maybe they have a little bit more. Then you get a little bit more sophisticated. You start pitching corporations. All of a sudden, we're pitching JPMorgan Chase. And you know what's so funny is anyone that's hiring at JPMorgan Chase thought someone like me was more interesting than someone that just did all the things they were supposed to do for a finance career. Because even Jamie Dimon talks about the importance of diversity. And I don't think he's someone that people consider to be alt-left. He just understands that diverse teams outperform.
Yeah.
Right. So even from a JPMorgan Chase point of view, people are looking for people who have a non-traditional background, who are willing to think outside the box, who are willing to ask questions, willing to say, why are we making this trade? Why are we investing in this stock? Why are we doing things the way things have always been done?
Yeah.
And so I felt like that actually gave me an edge, and it made me so much more comfortable in interviews, because I'd been, excuse my language, but shit on like 100 times already. So sure, I'll be happy to go into an interview and talk to someone and they can say my idea was stupid. I remember I interviewed once for Guggenheim and they were like, I don't think you're the person that should be working here, but you're the most interesting person we've talked to all day. And I'll take that as a win, right? And so, I think it also provided a different perspective that helped me stand out from a crowd of incredibly smart students who did all the same things, all the same clubs, all had 4.0 GPAs. But I was a person who had started a business that did something interesting. Yeah. And that was different,
I love it. I absolutely love it. And I can relate. So when I was a student at NYU Stern, I started a social enterprise in my junior year. And
what was it?
It was called Live, and our goal was to help business students use their business skills in communities.
How interesting.
And the idea was you're going to spend like your 10 weeks of your internship at IBM or Goldman Sachs, and then 2 weeks you're going to actually go roll off and do similar type of work at a nonprofit as like a kind of an in-kind pro bono work. And,
it's a little bit like social impact consulting, right? There's that class. That was one of my favorites when I was at Stern.
Yeah. And so me and a co-founder that was at NYU Stern, we launched this, we were trying to create it as a social enterprise, and it didn't quite take off that way. It had to become a nonprofit. We raised funding from the City Parks Foundation. But I had that same experience that I was at, recruiting event. And instead of walking around with my resume, I was walking around with my pitch to companies like, hey, I'm actually not looking for a job, but I'd like you to consider this for your summer internship program. And it was super empowering. And I think what I hear you say, and like the thing that I'm trying to get across in my classroom is like, it's hard to see from when you're working with clubs and saving, I don't know, the Tuesday lunch, like couple boxes of pizza. It seems so trivial that then can turn into, no, in a year, I'm going to be working with JPMorgan Chase. And in 2 years, I'm actually going to be working with, something totally different, financial security and inclusion for people around the world. How do you come to terms with that? How do you explain that to somebody? Like, if we're talking to someone that's just getting started on their journey, how do they see beyond the small step could actually eventually lead to the big step?
That's a really good question. I think it's one of those things where you got to break whatever you're trying to do into small steps, right? And what's funny is the smaller you are, the bigger the small wins feel, right? So today at Esusu, we cover, I don't think we talked about what we do, but we basically pioneered the idea that when people pay rent on time, that data gets reported to the credit bureaus so that people build and establish credit by paying rent the same way people do when they pay a mortgage. We have an eviction prevention fund, financial literacy, all these tools and services. Today, we cover about 5 million rental units, which is 12 million people. If we onboard a new property of 300 units, that's 600 people. That's not that exciting, right? That's great. I'm still excited. Every customer matters. But when you start, every win is a big win. So take advantage of that moment, like break it down into smaller chunks. So to be really practical, okay, I have an idea to do X, Y, and Z. Why don't I create a Facebook page for it? And send it out to 100 people. Wow, 100 people like this page. I'm doing great. Okay, great. Let me create a website. Well, now with ChatGPT, frankly, you could probably just ask ChatGPT to create it, but historically you could go to a Squarespace or a Wix. And so I think once again, it gets back to like, don't overthink it. Think about what you're trying to do today and tomorrow, and then have a vision for where you want to go. It's actually really important that you know where you want to kind of be in 5-10 years. And it's really important that you know where you want to be in a month. You don't necessarily need to know where you need to be in 2, 3, and 4 years when you're starting, right? And so what you want is, here's the world as it is today, and here's where I want the world to be. Nancy Duarte was an amazing public speaking person. I think we may have even studied her in Stern and organizational communications and some of those, but every TED Talk that she would coach on, it was the world as it is today and the world as it could be. The world as it is today and the world as it could be. I think it's important to have a vision for what the world could be, and then just one step you want to do today. That's it.
Well, so where do you guys see Esusu 5 years from now, right? Not tomorrow, but 5-10 years from now. What's the vision you have?
I mean, so for Esusu, we have a master plan that's in 3 chunks. Right now, we're doing what we call Esusu Rent. Then it's basically Esusu Financial Identity, and ultimately Esusu Wealth. And that actually parallels the journey we want to take our renters on, which is helping people establish a financial identity, improve their financial stability, and ultimately create wealth in America, right? And right now, there's 45 million people who are credit invisible, 70 million people who are credit thin or poor credit, all of whom are not contributing to American GDP. They're not contributing to growing this economy. And if we help them establish a financial identity, then we help them get maybe, their first financial coach, first financial literacy, that first credit product. One day, those people can become homeowners. And that's how we bridge both the racial wealth gap in America and the broader wealth gap in America, is by unlocking access to the American economy. Right now, people spend over $1 trillion every year in rent to their landlord. None of that is documented from a credit standpoint or a financial identity standpoint. We can use that to underwrite people. And so our vision is really, how do we move people from financial identity to wealth creation? Our formal vision statement is unleashing the power of data to bridge the racial wealth gap. And we think the key to that is home ownership, business ownership, education, and the rising tide lifts all boats. And so that's what we're focused on. Right now, we have about 12 million people in our 5 million rental units. All of those people have a relationship with Esusu. We understand their financial identity, and now we want to help them get into that next financial product. Most common thing people do on our platform, get a car loan, because a car loan means better job opportunities, bringing their kids to better school districts. That's the next step. Maybe after that, they say, hey, I want to go for continuing education. I want to go study with Ashish at NYU, and I'm going to learn. That's their next product. Then they say, now I have a much higher paying job. I have strong W-2 income. I can finance a single family mortgage, and I can be a homeowner. All of a sudden, my wealth 10x'd, and now I have generational wealth that I can pass on to my family. That's how we really move the ball forward for working Americans in this country. And so that's really what our vision's all about.
Wow, that's exciting.
Yeah.
So, when you were dreaming up this vision with your co-founder, sometimes, and it's interesting in the last few conversations I've had with entrepreneurs to talk about just, do you need to be delusional? Do you need to have a certain level of delusion about what's possible in the future when you're imagining things?
Absolutely. 100%. I like to say that you need to be unreasonably optimistic, because everything around you is telling you it's never going to work. I think the Netflix co-founder had a book called That Will Never Work. And that's literally every single signal you get as an entrepreneur is that will not work. That won't work. We've always done it this way. So 100%, you need to be a little bit delusional.
You've been named Time 100 Entrepreneur of the Year by EY. How do you not let that delusional piece get to your head, right? You said that absolutely you need to be unrealistically optimistic about things.
Honestly, it's about being intentional, right? And one of the things that's really important, I actually think in some ways the journey of being an entrepreneur keeps you grounded, right? Because like I said, every day something great happens, every day something shitty happens, and your job is to roll with it, right? So I might be getting Time 100 with Wamimo one day, but 1 hour later, a key employee is quitting. A competitor launched a product that's impactful in the market. The federal government changed a policy that impacts our business. Interest rates triple. COVID just happened. Somebody's upset and there's an HR issue, right? That stuff happens all the time. So it's very hard to get too big-headed, because something will humble you every single day as an entrepreneur. Number 2, I think it's about having the right people in your life, right? When my wife and I started dating, I was $100,000 in debt. I didn't have health insurance, and we've been together since that time. There's people in your life who can keep you grounded. My parents, they don't really care what I'm doing with Esusu. At the end of the day, they help me change diapers, right? And so, you got to have those people in your life who really keep you grounded. And then the third thing is, I think for us, we have the fortune of the type of business we're building, which is an impact business. One of the things that's remarkable is almost on a weekly basis, I end up going to something that is incredibly luxurious, right? Some sort of office in 30 Rockefeller or Hudson Yards, and you're like 60 feet high, and you're meeting 60 floors high, you're meeting with customers, you see New York, and it's like, wow, this is really spectacular. A few hours later, I'm at a public housing project in the Bronx at a tenant association meeting, listening to people talk about how their radiator hasn't worked for 5 years and they have hypothermia, right? That sort of intersection of the have and have nots, I think, is such a gift. It allows me to interact with people who are influential of capital or resources and network in that world. And at the same time, it keeps me grounded in reality and what the day-to-day existence of being human is.
Wow. Okay. So you talked about your wife, your family, kids, kid?
No kids yet.
Oh, okay. You were talking about you. Okay, great. Well,
my diapers, not
changing your diaper. Okay. Well, that was a while ago. So.
Yeah. But that's what they see, right? At the end of the day, it's this like, kid, they're like, all right, great. Are you married? Are you healthy? Are you like exercising? Yeah, whatever. Do whatever.
So I saw that you you did this talk for NYU students. And one of the things that you said in that talk was that, as an entrepreneur, you need to have a professional plan, but you also need to have a personal plan. So how do you navigate that, right? How do you navigate family life alongside your work life?
It's a work in progress. I definitely don't have all those answers figured out. And I think in many ways, it's the hardest part of being an entrepreneur. I think what you want to do is, I think often you're your own harshest critic. So I think I'm harder on myself than my wife or my parents or my friends or my co-founder is. But I think it's important to know what you stand for. So for example, something that's really important for me is when somebody that I care about is going through something hard, I want to be the person that's there. What I don't care about is being the person that's there when it's just like, hey, let's grab drinks on Tuesday after work. Nope, not going to be there, right? Or, hey, let's just like talk about the latest TV show. Maybe not going to be there. But when something's hard, you're going through a tough time, somebody's not doing well, I want to be the person that's there, right? So that's like maybe something I don't compromise on. Health and fitness, that's like the secret to like being sane as an entrepreneur. I make sure to run or get a workout in every day. That's something I won't compromise on. And I never go with other people. It's like my alone time where I'm going to do my own thing, and so you try to create those checks and balances, but I'd be lying if I said I was like a 10 out of 10 there. I think I heard a good anecdote on this that I really like. And it's sort of like you plan for the season. So like when you think about balance in life, it's not really being perfectly balanced every day. I think that's just like beating yourself up where you're like, every day I'm going to be perfectly balanced. I think it's unrealistic. But if you look at a year, if you look at 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, can I be balanced? That's my goal, right? So like, for example, this month I cut back on all travel, which is huge because that means I'm actually getting a good amount of sleep. I'm getting my workouts in every day. My wife and I just are working on a couple home renovations. I can do those things, but the next month I'm going to be on the road like 60% of the time. Yeah. It won't be as balanced, right? But how do you make sure to be intentional about that balance and life plan over the long haul? The talk I did for Stern, I think what I was talking about a little bit was sort of the pre-prep before launching a business, which is really thinking about when you don't come from means, thinking about, okay, how are you going to pay rent? How are you going to have your healthcare in place? How are you going to have a place to work out? How are you going to kind of maintain your relationships and kind of set expectations with people? And I think that stuff is worth doing in advance if you can. While you're in a corporate job or while you're in school. So that way, when you take that leap, you at least have some framework in place. It's kind of overwhelming to be taking the leap, no job, working on your startup, and then be like, oh yeah, how do I cover my rent? That's one thing if you have a backup plan. If you don't, try to plan it a little bit in advance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is that we talk about innovation being at the center of desirability, what customers actually want, what's desired, viability, what you can make some money on, and feasibility, what's the technological capacity for you to actually build that solution. And innovation is at that center. But with AI, right, is this new app Lovable? I mean, there's so many new apps. You could generate an app within minutes just from putting out some ideas in the world. I don't hear you talk too much about product at Esusu, more about the purpose and about company building. I'm curious, what your thoughts are on those three lenses. Which one's the most important in terms of Esusu. Sorry, I'm kind of jumped into two for one. So let's just focus on the first one. Between desirability, viability, and feasibility, if innovation isn't found in those three sectors, like, what's most important to you guys?
I think number one is building something people want. So for me, I think there's this sort of more West, when I say West, I mean like Silicon Valley idea that we're going to build this beautiful product and this beautiful technology. People are just going to use it. And I don't necessarily subscribe to that theory of thinking. I think beautiful design and beautiful product is critical. But number one is, are you actually solving a problem people care about? And more importantly, or equally importantly, are they willing to pay for it? Right? So I would actually much rather go talk to a customer, tell them we've built a product, get a contract in place, and then build it, than build something and then go out and try to seek the customer. And so to that end, I think maybe that's desirability in your category, because ultimately you need to create products and services that people want, right? Or you have some proxy for knowing they'll want it when it exists, if it's such frontier technology as an example. And so for us, that's always been our approach. Even when we were building our platform, we were very fortunate to have people who just gave us tough love. For example, we worked closely with related companies. Their vice chair, Jeff Brodsky, he's been a partner of Esusu's for a long time. And the first time we met with him, he took us to school, right? And he's like, here's everything that you need to do for us to ever consider buying from you. And I think what surprised him is we were like, okay, great. We're just going to go and do everything that you just told us to do and come back in 2 months and present that to you. And he's going to say, well, that's great, but you need to do 5 more things. Great. Thanks, Jeff. We're going to go back and we're going to do exactly what you want us to do. And we're going to come back to the table with that solution, right? And that earned his respect, but that also made sure we built something that was commercially viable. And I think that's really how I think about building. Now there's this whole idea of sort of design partners. I think people talk about a lot in entrepreneurship. I conceptually believe in that. I think sometimes now people use design partners as a vanity metric rather than reality. But I think the actual ethos of it is really important, which is you're working with a commercial customer that's willing to buy your product to understand what their needs are as you're building. Yeah. Because I see a lot of companies that raise a lot of money, build something, and then it doesn't matter, or it's just too comparable to what's already in the market. So then it becomes a race to the bottom.
And so how do you avoid, if your focus is desirability, building a product that's going to solve for the landlords in this situation, how do you make sure that you're still making a result for the stakeholders that might not be the ones that are paying for this product?
It's a good question. So, it's at Esusu, we have a credo. It's basically like our constitution at Esusu, right? So we have a mission, a vision, operating principles, values, then we have guardrails, things we'll never do, right? So for example, we'll never sell people's data to malevolent actors, as an example. So we have some of these checks and balances to make sure that no matter what we do from a business standpoint, it never sort of crosses a moral threshold that we've established for a company. So that's number one. I think number two is we think a lot about incentive alignment, right? And so what Esusu has done well in the market is win-win-wins, right? So for example, right now our core product, when people pay rent, it goes to the credit bureaus. That's great for the renters because they build credit for their largest monthly expense, right? They have to pay rent no matter what. It's a behavior they already do, and now they get to build credit for it. For the landlord, it's great because it encourages renters to pay their rent on time. It makes their renters more sticky because I'd rather live in a building where I build credit than one that I don't. And it's something they can market to attract new renters, right? So it creates that win-win. For the credit bureaus, once again, it's actually not beneficial for them to have 45 million people that are credit invisible. Those are people they can't underwrite. Those are people they can't make money on. So that's a loss. Lenders can't originate products, so they're not lending off their balance sheet to those people. So they're not making money. And from a policy and government standpoint, those are people that are not participating to their fullest capacity in the US economy. So literally everyone's losing. It's a broken status quo. So we always think about what are those win-win-win-wins, right? And for us, it's not just the landlord, but we kind of had already solved for the renter part. It was like, okay, how do we message this and make this valuable to the landlord? And one of the feedback that Jeff gave us at Related was, I can't buy one product because I don't want to be basically sole sourcing for every product. I need a platform that addresses financial well-being of my renters comprehensively. So great, we'll do rent reporting, we'll do eviction prevention, we'll do financial literacy, we'll do financial coaching, we'll do tax filing, so on and so forth, right? We're gonna have a package so that you can basically contract with Esusu as a single vendor to cover a lot of needs rather than 10 different companies you have to contract with, each of which price you exponentially higher. Number two, we have certain information security standards. You need to be SOC 2 Type 2 compliant. Great. You need to have a certain legal threshold. Great. You need to do this research into consumer privacy. Great. Right. But all those things kind of were win-wins for everyone involved.
Yeah.
So I hope that sort of addresses it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I was thinking about like, a lot of your customers on the kind of the landlord side, property owner side are larger, I imagine at this point.
Yeah.
How do you get to that last mile, knowing that I think something like 90% of landlords are actually really small. They only own one additional property, or it's their property and they're renting part of it. How do you get down to that level and make that impact?
So this is where product becomes really critical. So we, the thing that Esusu, I think, figured out very early on was distribution. So we actually started as a direct-to-consumer company, realized D2C is incredibly difficult. And what we needed to do was figure out a way to leverage an existing infrastructure to reach people at lower cost. For us, that ended up being the landlords. And that was the first sort of distribution nut we cracked. The next thing we did was really look at, okay, how do we encourage landlords to adopt? And we formed strategic partnerships with Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, the government-sponsored entities. And they have programs where they cover the cost of our product for any assets they finance. They cover 60% of the debt market in real estate. So we can go to many landlords and say, hey, here's what we do. They might say, this is really cool, but it's not a priority, or budgets are tight, or interest rates tripled. So we're like basically operating at a loss. And we can say, guess what? It's free for 2 years. The government's going to pay for it. Let's sign a contract, right? So that was our next big distribution unlock. The next challenge that we have is exactly what you talked about. We've covered a lot of institutional real estate. So how do we reach people where they are? We basically took our core product and turned it into an embedded finance solution. It's called Rent Reporting as a Service. What we do for landlords, we turned into a set of APIs that can be plugged into fintech apps, and that can be sold to employers, and that can be plugged into payment software. So what that means is whatever you use for your financial banking, maybe you use JPMorgan Chase, maybe you use Chime, maybe you use Block, maybe you use Walmart's One Finance app, we can have an embedded widget into that app that allows you to build credit through that application. We're sort of like Plaid. If you're familiar with Plaid, it's like an embedded bank linking tool.
Yeah.
We've basically built an embedded fintech tool. So no matter what you use for your financial services, we can be a part of it. And our thesis was, we can't win top of wallet. Top of wallet basically means the go-to finance app or card that you use for most of your purchases, because all the big banks are spending billions of dollars acquiring customers and serving them. But what we can do is be a part of every single one of those, so that no matter where you go, we are the experts in helping you build credit for paying rent. And that's actually one of the biggest things that consumers want, especially in the subprime, or basically people who are below 660 in credit category. Then you think about employers. That's another place where we can package this as a financial health benefit for employers. Think about Walmart, Home Depot, even property managers, right? Their staff on site in properties actually live a lot like their renters. And so they can benefit from something that helps them build credit for paying their rent on time. And so now, once again, we're taking our superpower of distribution, but reaching a different audience. That's how we're thinking about that last mile.
Wow. Nice. Okay. So I think we're going to wrap up with a couple questions. So one thing that I think, coming into this interview and talking with you, and one of the things I heard you talk a lot about is your background and having grown up, your first generation South Asian American, like myself, I'm also the same boat. And you talked about how that experience really kind of motivated you to see the world in a different way in terms of whether it's transformation and not being wasteful for food, or with the access to financial inclusion. And so I think it's like an interesting time for South Asians in America. Okay. And I think it's like, so interesting question, two South Asian men talking to each other is like, how do you navigate on one hand, having the kind of, like a lower privileged position, right? You're a minority in a country in America that, at first, your dad was mugged on his first day. And on the other side, being in a kind of a privileged position where, a lot of the tech CEOs now are South Asian men. And how do you navigate those two different kind of parts of being South Asian?
Yeah, it's a complicated question, and one that might need a part 2 on the interview to fully unpack.
Good.
But the way that I think about it is, today, what we've accomplished with Esusu, for my co-founder, Wamimo, he was Nigerian American, and myself, who's Indian American, is beyond our wildest dreams, right? And, coming from where we came from, and I'll speak for myself, coming from where I came from, it was not necessarily in the cards. right? It wasn't the path that my parents would have predicted. It wasn't the path that society would have predicted. And it certainly wasn't how I saw myself growing up. But now that we've come to this place where we have the platform that we have with Esusu, the impact we've been able to have, the access to opportunity, I've seen people react to it in one of two ways, right? Way one is I'm the exception and I'm better than my fellow South Asians or my fellow people of color, or even my fellow poor rural white Americans or my fellow whatever, right? And then there's people who say, there's a lot of people who invested in me and my responsibility is to open the door for other people. And I fall in path too, right? There are so many South Asians, many of whom aren't even counted in America, who are still, maybe working paycheck to paycheck, but those aren't the South Asians that are talked about. We talk about a lot of Indian Americans who are CEOs of big tech companies, but there's such a wide diaspora in Asian Americans in this country, especially South Asian Americans, that there's a lot of work to do, that everyone gets the opportunity to go from their father getting mugged, no money, sort of doing everything they could to create a semblance of the American dream, to being the CEO of a tech company. And we need to make sure more people have that shot. And that's not just for South Asian Americans. That's for Black folks in America, Latinos. That's for white rural Americans who are not getting opportunities. That's for literally everyone, right? I'm a big believer that the rising tide lifts all boats. And that's our responsibility. How do we make the American dream true for everyone? Not everyone's going to be an entrepreneur, but whatever that is for you, how do we do it? So I really fall in that bucket of, I've been fortunate. We've had amazing opportunities. My life has been beyond what was written. How do we open that door for others to have those same opportunities?
Wow. I'm inspired, definitely. I mean, it's been a really exciting chat here.
Well, how do you think about it? Now I'm gonna. Well, you can edit it out of the interview for. That's okay.
No, it's fine. That's a great question. I think that I'm constantly bringing a lot of awareness to it. I think that on one hand, I feel a lot of what you're saying, that it's important for me to think about ways that I can support others that, in the AAPI kind of community that might have a different scenario than I did, right? Like my dad came here as an engineer, right? So that's like different than if your family comes as a taxi driver.
Absolutely.
And so I had a certain amount of privilege in that way. And then I recognized the different circumstances of different minority groups that are here, whether it's Native Americans, Blacks, Latinos. Everyone has a different circumstance for why they're here. And so, yeah, it's an interesting space to navigate in entrepreneurship and technology in particular, because on one hand, you walk into a space and you can feel very much like a minority. And on the other hand, you can walk into a space and you're part of a majority community. You're looking around at the leadership and hey, you look a lot like them. Mm-hmm. And so it's just a balance of walking the line on and recognizing where I have privilege and where I don't. And getting people to talk about it. I think that's my role as a professor.
Absolutely.
It's just like, hey, let's bring some awareness to this. Like you can't play the minority card in every situation. And
absolutely.
And it's not like you want to play a card anyway. It's just like your experiences matter depending on where you are.
I love that. That's well put. I think, I'm a believer, as you can tell, in sort of this concept called America that we've created here. And something that my co-founder and I reflect on is, what we sort of have gotten away from sometimes is like, if someone else's kid is having a problem that doesn't look like me, I should care, right? And that's ultimately what it's all about. Like, it doesn't matter where you are in this country. If you don't have the same opportunity that I have today, that's a problem. How do we create that for people? And I think that's what's sort of lost in this dynamic of where we are in this country. It's so polarized, but people don't actually talk to each other. They don't know their neighbors. How many people, I've had the fortune with Esusu, because we have customers across the country, of being everywhere from rural Minnesota to San Francisco and everything in between in America, right? And we're so much more connected than we pretend that we're not. And so I think that's the big gap right now, is that people are just thinking in this like very sort of tribalistic way, but really you should care if someone else, whether it's urban, rural, Black, white, something in the middle, if they're not doing okay, that's a problem for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very inspiring, and I think it's an important message in this moment. Last question. So you probably spend almost all your time talking about Esusu. If you were forced to not talk about what you're doing, about your work for the next week, what would you be doing instead?
Oh man. I have so many other interests. It's hard because I'm definitely a workaholic. I think I would, like at the risk of being cliche, I'd probably try to spend time with family. I'd probably sleep 8 hours a night. I'd, do some of those basics. But if the question is really more like, what would my alternative career be or my alternative passion? There's two. Number one, I'd be the GM for the New York Mets because I love baseball and I love Moneyball, and I'd love to figure out how to construct a World Series team. So David Stearns, if you're listening to this, hire me as your intern. And then number two, I love to cook. So I would consider opening a restaurant or being a chef. I love cooking and bringing people together and creating community.
Nice. I love it. All right. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much. And, really excited to cheer you on with your mission. It's a really great mission, and you guys are the right people to do it.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's been a joy.